Hey guys, it's Emma Vigling with TYT Politics. We had a big night last night. I am so pumped to talk about it. You know I get my horse race fix in, gets me fired up. Very exciting stuff. So, of course, it ended up just being a two-person debate. Gary Johnson and Jill Stein did not make the cut. So, yes, it was just the two major candidates last night, but we still got a good amount of drams, if you will, last night. So, I will start off by saying I think that Hillary Clinton won the debate. I think that she just looked so much more presidential next to this clown. But hold, I know this nuanced opinion may not be appropriate for the mainstream media, but I think that maybe he got some wins where he really needed to, in the states that he really needed to. So let's continue. So she started off really flat.
The central question in this election is really what kind of country we want to be and what kind of future we'll build together. Today is my granddaughter's second birthday, so I think about this a lot.
And he, in his opening statement, hit all the notes that he wanted to. He said, we have thousands of jobs leaving Michigan and Ohio, which are the states that, of course, that he's targeting. He talked about the trade deals, NAFTA. She's very vulnerable in those situations. So it was a really good note for him to hit off the bat. She almost seemed nervous. I was like, you've been doing this for decades, girlfriend. Let's get it together, because this guy is the prime ape. He comes out swinging and he goes right for the gut. So you got to be prepared.
So Ford is leaving. You see that, their small car division leaving. Thousands of jobs, leaving Michigan, leaving Ohio. They're all leaving.
Obviously, she decided to go for the first blow. It seemed very calculated and just something that her advisors fed to her, which is a very Hillary Clinton move.
And the kind of plan that Donald has put forth would be trickle-down economics all over again. In fact, it would be the most extreme version, the biggest tax cuts for the top percent of the people in this country than we've ever had. I call it trumped up trickle-down, because that's exactly what it would be.
Oh, God. It hurts my soul and my heart. It's painful. Come on, you sound so forced. And he, smirked a little bit, okay, yeah, I know what you were going for there. It did not work. So she started off really poorly. I was not thrilled with how the first half hour really went for her. It was an epic fail, I agree. And now we're in his territory, so we're talking about trade deals and manufacturing jobs and stuff like that. That's where he excels, and those Rust Belt states are where he's targeting. So, and it's the great irony of someone whose slogan was, "You're fired," for him to be the job creator. But that's how he's pitched himself to the American people. And that's how he has made his name for himself in the political world. For some reason, it stuck. Despite the fact that, he has all these failed businesses and he treats his employees like complete shit, that's what he's propped himself up as. So for some reason, it's had some staying power, and that's where he excels. So again, that's where the first half hour focused on, and that's how he started off. He pitched himself as an outsider against the establishment. Again, if he was smarter, he would hit that note better. He would hit that note more. But he's so fucking dense that he doesn't do it all the time. He should hit Bernie supporters, Bernie supporters, Bernie supporters, come to me. I don't think he has as much of a window there as he did right after the DNC stuff was really fresh, because a lot of the millennials and Bernie supporters are either going to Clinton or they're going to third-party candidates, Jill Stein, Gary Johnson. The percentage of millennials going for third parties is significantly higher than the rest of the populace. So he kind of missed his window there, but he still should paint himself as the outsider, because it's the most effective strategy that he has.
Now, in all fairness to Secretary Clinton, yes, is that okay? Good. I want you to be very happy. It's very important to me. But in all fairness to Secretary Clinton, when she started talking about this, it was really very recently. She's been doing this for 30 years. And why hasn't she made the agreements better? The NAFTA agreement is defective just because of the tax and many other reasons, but just because of the fact.
Yeah, he's hitting her over and over again on these trade deals, saying that Obama and the Democrats have created a trade deficit, and it's all because of what you and your husband did in the 90s, these trade deals, etc. What her campaign really miscalculated on, a number of the things that her campaign miscalculated on, were the fact that the American people didn't know the names of these trade deals and wouldn't really be able to comprehend what they do. The TPP, they thought they could sneak in there without there being any much hoopla about it, because NAFTA was not really protested that much in the public eye when it was passed in the 90s. But they took the American people for fools, and a lot of the unions and the workers and blue-collar workers in this country were saying, fuck no, I don't want another trade deal. So basically, she's been really poor on these trade deals, and no one believes that she's against the TPP, and Trump capitalized on that. So again, the first half hour, he seemed good. She responded to the not being able to bring back jobs and NAFTA by basically saying that her husband did well in the 90s, and and saying she voted against CAFTA as a senator, but he just kept hammering Bill Clinton and her for their role in NAFTA, and it's really going to hit home, I think, in the Rust Belt states. So I really thought that was a good strategy right out of the gate for Donald Trump. And when you're mentioning that your husband did well in the 90s, maybe mention that he left with a budget surplus. Why don't you mention that at all? Like, that's probably the best thing that you have going for you in terms of advocating your fiscal responsibility to the American people. It's the most obvious, easy layup for you, yet you refuse to mention it. Maybe because you think if people dig a little deeper, then they'll see other nefarious things going on. But the surplus was a good thing. So focus on that.
Well, you haven't done it in 30 years or 26 years.
Well,
any number you
I've
want to
been
do.
a senator,
You
Donald,
haven't done it.
And
you haven't
I
done
have
it.
been a
And
Secretary of State, and I have
Your
done
husband signed
a lot.
NAFTA, which was one of the worst things that ever happened to the
that's your
manufacturing
opinion.
industry.
That is your
You go to
opinion.
New England, you go to Ohio, Pennsylvania, you go anywhere you want, Secretary Clinton, and you will see devastation where manufacturing is down 30, 40, sometimes 50%. NAFTA is the worst trade deal maybe ever signed anywhere, but certainly ever signed in this country. And now you want to approve Trans-Pacific Partnership. You were totally in favor of it. Then you heard what I was saying, how bad it is, and you said, I can't win that debate.
She changed it in the primary based on what Bernie was saying, because, again, these trade deals have actually hit home with the American populace. But it's a good, effective strategy to say that, yeah, because she's scared of me, she's changing her policy on trade deals. But here's when it starts going south for him. He, I think, really did do well in the first half hour, in the first third of the debate, where he was able to communicate what he needed to those Rust Belt states, but it all went downhill for him from here on out.
Mr. Trump, we're talking about the burden that Americans have to pay, yet you have not released your tax returns. And the reason nominees have released their returns for decades is that voters will know if their potential president owes money to, who he owes it to, and any business conflicts. Don't Americans have a right to know if there are any conflicts of interest?
I don't mind releasing. I'm under a routine audit, and it'll be released. And as soon as the audit's finished, it'll be released. But you will learn more about Donald Trump by going down to the federal elections, where I filed a 104-page, essentially financial statement of sorts, the forms that they have.
And then Lester Holt says you're perfectly free to release your tax returns during the audit.
The IRS says an audit of your taxes, you're perfectly free to release your taxes during an audit. And so the question, does the public's right to know outweigh your personal?
Well, I told you, I will release them as soon as the audit. Look, I've been under audit almost for 15 years. I know a lot of wealthy people that have never been audited. I said, do you get audited? I get audited almost every year.
Hillary Clinton says that everyone has released their tax returns, every presidential candidate, for the past 40 years, which is true. He basically tries to deflect and say, I'll release my tax returns when you release your emails. I don't know how effective that was. Not a great strategy, especially when she just mentioned that every presidential candidate has done it for the past years. And the reason that he's not doing it is because he's not that rich, and he's not as rich as he says he is, which she points out later.
Why won't he release his tax returns? And I think there may be a couple of reasons. First, maybe he's not as rich as he says he is. Second, maybe he's not as charitable as he claims to be. Third, we don't know all of his business dealings, but we have been told through investigative reporting that he owes about $650 million to Wall Street and foreign banks. Or maybe he doesn't want the American people, all of you watching tonight, to know that he's paid nothing in federal taxes, because the only years that anybody's ever seen were a couple of years when he had to turn them over to state authorities when he was trying to get a casino license, and they showed he didn't pay any federal income tax. So
that makes
if
me
he's
smart.
paid zero.
Yeah, I guess you gained the system and conned us and conned the American people by not paying your fucking taxes. But why does that make you a good leader of our country? It makes you a con man, which is what you are. So I thought it was a really effective strategy. She kind of got into her groove, and she basically was just saying, like, you're a con man. She should have said it right there. You're a con man. But she didn't. She was strangely restrained. She again started to loosen up, and it continues to go further and further south for him.
We have to bring back law and order. Now, whether or not in a place like Chicago you do stop and frisk, which worked very well, Mayor Giuliani is here, it worked very well in New York. It brought the crime rate way down. But you take the gun away from criminals that shouldn't be having it. We have gangs roaming the street, and in many cases, they're illegally here, illegal immigrants.
I thought that you were endorsed by the NRA and you wanted more guns to protect people. But you're saying, of course, black people don't have to get guns. Only these white right-wing nuts have guns. And that's what you want. That's the dog whistle that you want to throw out there. Stop and frisk is a great policy for white people because they don't target white people and their guns don't get taken away. Or they don't get arrested for pot on the street when they're walking down the street. By the way, in New York, this policy that he's advocating that was later ruled unconstitutional, I think the figure was 91% of those stopped in New York were black or Latino Americans. And of course, drugs are used by all races at around the same rate. And that means that minorities are going to be disproportionately given criminal records if they're being stopped more. But that concept, I think, is too complex for the mind of Donald J. Trump.
Stop and frisk was ruled unconstitutional in New York because it largely singled out black and Hispanic young men.
No, you're wrong. It went before a judge who was a very against police judge. It was taken away from her, and our new mayor, refused to go forward with the case. They would have won an appeal. If you look at it, throughout the country, there are many places where
the argument is that it's a form of racial profiling.
No, the argument is that we have to take the guns away from these people that have them and that are bad people that shouldn't have them.
The NRA, Wayne LaPierre, their heads are exploding. Shut up, Donald.
But you look at Dallas, where the relationships were really studied. The relationships were really a beautiful thing. And then 5 police officers were killed one night very violently.
Which is just ridiculous. So you're saying that because the cops had a better, more harmonious relationship with the citizens and the minorities in that community, you are basically saying that that's the cause of the shooting of those police officers in Dallas? That is so offensive and also so counterintuitive. We were just in Detroit, and I had a very great discussion with someone that was a citizen there, and he said, look at these cops, they're not bothering us. They were actually at an anti-Trump protest, and he said it's because we have community policing here and we have a much more harmonious relationship with the cops. So that's the kind of lovely American wonderful sentiment and structure that Donald J. Trump wants to overturn because he wants law and order, which is basically just saying, white people, don't worry, the cops will crack down on those pesky African Americans and minorities in the rest of the country.
Well, I've heard Donald say this at his rallies, and it's really unfortunate that he paints such a dire, negative picture of black communities in our country. Ugh. The vibrancy of the black church, the black businesses that employ so many people, the opportunities that so many families are working to provide for their kids.
And she then mentions that many African American men are being overly incarcerated, kind of the points that I just illustrated, which were a direct result of some of the policies that she actually advocated for, super predators, if we recall. But it just seems like that's not really going to be hit as much home for regular people watching, because you have to have a very nuanced understanding of the 1990s incarceration policy to see that the Clintons actually perpetrated a lot of the things that she's that she's advocating against. But painting Donald Trump as the racist and her as better for minorities is really easy, and he didn't do himself any favors in this debate. To the average viewer, she seemed way better towards minority communities, way more nuanced, and she came out against private prisons, which is great. You don't need to believe her, but I liked that she wanted them out of not only the states now that they are out of the federal system, and she advocates for gun control for those on the no-fly list, which is a layup for her because 85% of Americans believe that the people on the no-fly list should not have guns. It's common sense. And then Donald Trump trumps her, to borrow some language from Hillary Clinton's stupid focus groups or whatever, and says that he agrees. Then, my favorite line of the debate, it's like a nice warm meal. I love it.
Mr. Trump,
I think Donald just criticized me for preparing for this debate. And yes, I did. And you know what else I prepared for? I prepared to be president. And I think that's a good thing.
Oh, he's hurting. Oh, that was great. And you know what I'm finding right now? I'm rooting for her. And I know she's bad. And I know I hate her. And I know that she's a neocon. And I know that she's all of these corporatist things. But when she's standing up against this monster, I'm rooting for her. And I can't help myself. And it was just so good. Oh, I love that line so much. And she continues. Then we're into the birther stuff. We're diving right in. We're about an hour in. Donald's getting a little uncomfortable. He starts to blame birtherism on Clinton. Yes, she had racist tactics in the 2008 primary. We all know this. It is very, very true and obvious. But then he tries to blame it on her, which just is a bridge too far for most people. Lester Holt continues to challenge him.
The birth certificate was produced in 2011. You continued to tell the story and question the president's legitimacy in 2012, 13, 14, 15, as recently as January. So the question is, what changed your mind?
Well, nobody was pressing it. Nobody was caring much about it. I figured you'd ask the question tonight, of course, but nobody was caring much about it. But I was the one that got him to produce the birth certificate, and I think I did a good job. Secretary Clinton also fought it. I mean, now everybody in mainstream is going to say, oh, that's not true. Look, it's true. Sidney Blumenthal sent a reporter. You just have to take a look at CNN last week, the interview with your former campaign manager, and she was involved. But just like she can't bring back jobs, she can't produce.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to follow up, and I will let you respond to that because there's a lot there. But we're talking about racial healing in this segment. What do you say to Americans?
Well, it was I say nothing. I say nothing because I was able to get him to produce it. He should have produced it a long time before. I say nothing. But let me just tell you, when you talk about healing, I think that I've developed very, very good relationships over the last little while with the African-American community. I think you can see that. And I feel that they really wanted me to come to that conclusion. And I think I did a great job and a great service, not only for the country, but even for the president in getting him to produce his birth certificate.
Secretary Clinton.
Well, just listen to what you heard. And clearly, as Donald just admitted, he knew he was going to stand on this debate stage and Lester Holt was going to be asking us questions. So he tried to put the whole racist birther lie to bed. But it can't be dismissed that easily. He has really started his political activity based on this racist lie that our first black president was not an American citizen. There was absolutely no evidence for it, but he persisted. He persisted year after year because some of his supporters, people that he was trying to bring into his fold, apparently believed it or wanted to believe it. But remember, Donald started his career back in 1973 being sued by the Justice Department for racial discrimination because he would not rent apartments in one of his developments to African Americans, and he made sure that the people who worked for him understood that was the policy. He actually was sued twice by the Justice Department. So he has a long record of engaging in racist behavior.
And I don't know why she mentions the Central Park Five, or didn't mention the Central Park Five, which seems like another layup for her. She kept missing these, she's going far right on these field goals from 30 yards out. She's not getting the hitting the momentum that she could. She could have hammered him more. I'm sure that she had some advisors, of course, she has a million advisors, telling her, oh, you don't want to seem too hard, you want to have a little soft edge. No, be a bitch. You're a bitch. Be a bitch. Seriously, be authentic. That's all you gotta do. At this point, she doesn't even remember how it is to be authentic. But once she started getting in her groove a little, she had a little shoulder shake that everyone keeps talking about. Kind of ridiculous, but kind of funny at the same time. Once you get in your groove, you actually can be a fairly effective politician. So just do that.
We settled the suit with no admission of guilt. It was very easy to do, but they sued many people. I notice you bring that up a lot, and I also notice the very nasty commercials that you do on me in so many different ways, which I don't do on you. Maybe I'm trying to save the money. But frankly, I look at that and I say, isn't that amazing? Because I settled that lawsuit with no admission of guilt. But that was a lawsuit brought against many real estate firms, and it's just one of those things. I'll go on one step further. In Palm Beach, Florida, tough community, a brilliant community, a wealthy community, probably the wealthiest community there is in the world. I opened a club and really got great credit for it. No discrimination against African Americans, against Muslims, against anybody. And it's a tremendously successful club, and I'm so glad I did it. And I have been given great credit for what I did, and I'm very, very proud of it. And that's the way I feel. That is the true way I feel.
When did we wander into this absurdity? I have no idea what you're talking about. Also, apparently, I hear from sources, my good friend who has been there, that club is entirely white. But I digress.
So we've got to do everything we can to vacuum up intelligence from Europe, from the Middle East. That means we've got to work more closely with our allies. And that's something that Donald has been very dismissive of. We're working with NATO, the longest military alliance in the history of the world, to really turn our attention to terrorism. We're working with our friends in the Middle East, many of which, as you know, are Muslim-majority nations. Donald has consistently insulted Muslims abroad, Muslims at home, when we need to be cooperating with Muslim nations and with the American Muslim community.
When she touts her foreign policy and diplomatic prowess, that is her best option in terms of looking good in the eyes of the American people. He looks like a clown on foreign policy. And yes, we know about all of her warmongering and her war hawkishness, but she is experienced, and people, when they're looking at international terrorism and things of that nature, sorry, just disconnected there, like a steady hand. And she does have the ability to appear to have a steady hand in foreign policy. And then we get into the war in Iraq, which she supported, but she was able to turn the tables and make it about Donald Trump.
Well, I hope the fact checkers are turning up the volume and really working hard. Donald supported the invasion of Iraq.
Wrong.
That is absolutely
wrong.
Proved over and over again.
Wrong.
He actually advocated for the actions we took in Libya.
He looked dumb. And then, of course, I actually, Teresa talks about the global warming stuff, which I forgot to write down. She talked about how, yes, Donald Trump believes that climate change is a hoax. I don't. It's true. A hoax perpetrated by the Chinese. That was true, and he said, no, I didn't. And now I wake up to all these memes showing his tweets saying that it was a hoax perpetrated by the Chinese. So she had devastating blow after devastating blow after devastating blow towards the end. But hold. She did win. In an objective sense, she had more facts. He was stumbling. He looked like a buffoon, of course. But the Rust Belt stuff may put him over the edge. She did not have a knockout blow. She had some great lines, and I was really pumped up towards the second half of the debate. But he, capitalizing on this populism and this anti-trade stuff, may have an effect in the Rust Belt states, the places where he could use the most delegates, or not delegates, I'm sorry. He could use the most momentum. He could take some of those states. She's been trending downward. He's up in a few polls. And I do think that this anti-trade mentality could land home, despite the fact that he looks like a buffoon. This will certainly help her in the national polls. I'm calling it right now. It will help her in the national polls, and she will do better. But he may do better in those states that he needs. And he kept citing them. He kept citing Ohio. He kept citing Pennsylvania. He kept citing Michigan. Stuff like that. Where manufacturing in those areas has really hurt the middle class in those areas, his anti-trade rhetoric could actually land home.